Thanks for staying with us. The Central Bank of Nigeria's decision to hold the benchmark interest rate at 27.5 matters for everyday Nigerians because it signals a commitment to continue the hard work of bringing down inflation, which still hovers above 22%. That stable rate is meant to cool price pressures, protect the naira, and keep the financial system secure, so you're less likely to see wild swings in loan costs or currency crashes. That's what we're being told. And looking ahead, the next step from the CBN is to watch how things progress. There'll be on inflation data, energy prices, and global pressures like trade tensions that could still push costs up. By monitoring those trends, the bank can decide whether to begin easing rates later or keep them firm until inflation truly slows. So this is what we're being told about whatever is happening right now. And we're being joined by the expert that can help us make more sense to what we are talking about today. And I'm talking about Mr. Segun Sopitan. Mr. Sopitan, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mr. Agaji. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Well, in case you do not know who Mr. Sopitan is, he is the principal partner, Woodridge And Scott Consulting. So today we're consulting you. The CBN has just left their, after the MPC, they left the interest rate at 27%. That's on the premise that also inflation is stable at 22.22% or thereabouts and all that. Tell us what the implication of this is, first of all.
The whole decision was not unexpected. I think that the central bank governor had signaled, the country, the economy, on what they were likely to do when he raised concerns about liquidity problems being created by FAC, by the monthly FAC sharing spree, if you like. And once you hear that, then you know that, okay, they're still worried about potential inflationary pressures, and a drop in rates was unlikely. Now, implications. First of all, we've got to look at juxtapose the NPR against inflation numbers, because at the end of the day, that's the primary purpose of that tool. It's to actually help manage inflationary pressures in the economy in exchange for growth, managing growth rates, right? So NPR at 27.5%, and inflation supposedly, I have to use that word, at 22% thereabouts, would suggest that there is real return on investment for your deposits, whatever funds you invest in the financial market, because the benchmark rate in the market is above inflation rates, which would have been the desirable situation at all times to encourage investment, to encourage savings, to encourage capital formation that will then lead to investment and growth within the economy. However, one thing that we have to bear in mind is that the 22% inflation is not reflective of our reality. We can't forget that. The 22% inflation is rebased and is based primarily on the comparison between this year and last year, which is, it's extremely unorthodox and unheard of. You can't want to calculate your inflation numbers as an economy and use, it's a year on year. You're basically saying year on year inflation is inflation. That is terribly far from the truth. Inflation must take into cognizance activities within the economy over a distant time window, a time horizon, to ensure that the data is representative of reality. So it's got statistical significance. So bearing that in mind, the truth of the matter is that yes, inflation, we're experiencing a slowdown in the increase in prices of goods and services within the economy. It's called disinflation. In other words, we are not experiencing a deflation where we are having price reduction. What we're experiencing right now is disinflation, where prices are no longer rising at the same speed as they used to. So inflation rate as we speak today is probably still somewhere around 30%. Before the rebasing earlier this year, inflation was 34%. With the rebasing, it came down to 24%. And then we've seen a reduction in inflation rate from 24 to about 22 now. So I would just say, yeah, apart from the other things that the NBS did to the inflation numbers, with the rebasing, for example, tampering with the weight assigned to food, in the basket, which I thought was also a very curious decision, considering the reality. Apart from all of that, what this will tell you is that we'll probably have inflation at somewhere around 32, maybe 30%, based on the old inflation numbers. With NPR still, trending at 27.5%, you can begin to see why the CBN remains reluctant to start a reduction. Inflation has not abated as much as the numbers are telling us. And then, of course, there is also the reality of potential global shocks that remains a risk with all of the tariff uncertainties around the Trump administration's approach to trade, international trade policy over the last 6 months, the continuing instability in the Middle East, the continuing instability with oil prices. There's still so many things that we're not sure about, and that is why the CBN is maintaining a cautious approach and refusing to reduce NPR rates, as some of us would have loved to see, in spite of apparent slowing down of inflation. So what this means right now is that we are still playing the waiting game, and we'll have to see what happens in the month of between now and September, when the next MPC meeting will take place.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you used the word slowing inflation, because a lot of people are questioning what parameters they are using to say that inflation is going down. But like you have said, it may not be going down, but it is slower in rising than it used to be. But another concern I have is when they talk about the economy growing, because one of the things they said was that, okay, the inflation is not there as it used to be. The NPR can remain where it is, and the economy is also growing. But this growth that they are projecting, they're telling us, the numbers they're throwing at us are as a result of rebasing. We don't understand, a lot of us who are not the experts in the field do not understand whether this rebasing gives us the true picture of what we are facing as an economy, a country's economy, or not. Are we being hoodwinked? Because it seems as if you have been asked not to take 10 cubes of sugar, and then you end up putting the 10 cubes of sugar in 4 liters of water, and you drink the water. Because you don't taste it, you think there is no longer sugar in that 4 liters. Meanwhile, you have still taken that. That's what it sounds to me when I hear rebasing and economy stabilizing, just because of the numbers we are getting out of this rebased parameter they are using to measure. So what does it mean for an economy to give us numbers just based on the fact that they have rebased whatever they're using to measure the economy?
Rebasing is standard practice, is global best practice all over the world when it comes to major economic indicators, especially with inflation, the inflation rates, and with the GDP growth rates. The purpose of rebasing is just to recognize the fact that things change over time. You would expect that there will be expansion, there will be diversification, there will be
my question is, are we trusting the data? Are we trusting the data that they're using? That's the thing.
Yes, I understand. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that rebasing in itself is necessary, and in fact, it's something that as a country we have not done often enough. So, in the last 20 years, we've rebased only twice. We rebased in 2014 under Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's leadership, and we just rebased. So the NBS just presented rebased GDP numbers this month. So that's twice in about 25 years or thereabouts, and it's nowhere near enough. We need to be doing this more regularly so that we don't then see distortions that we're seeing now. Rebasing of the inflation rate also is something that should happen more often. Again, to reflect changes in the fundamentals within the economy, new products that will be added to the basket, products that will be taken out, and all of that. The problem with the rebasing we have done, especially with inflation, is that we've also changed the reference year. And the reference year, we have adopted last year a 1 year difference as a reference year. What you've done basically is to take out all of the historical data regarding price movements beyond last year. So you are presenting an incomplete and imperfect picture with regards to data, and you are going to mislead policymakers. And it's affecting the CBN. You can hear it in the language of the CBN governor when he's reading out the decision of the MPC. There's a lot of uncertainty. They're avoiding some of the numbers they normally would have quoted, because those numbers were beginning to have a confidence problem with the numbers that the NBS is giving to us. So the rebasing, unfortunately, we have to really ask questions, about what has been done, what's happened with the methodology, the GDP numbers that have come out. There's so many inconsistencies, in the numbers. The inflation numbers themselves, there are so many inconsistencies. You can't explain why core inflation and headline inflation and food inflation are not aligned. They're telling two different stories. So there's a lot to really unpack with what's happening with the MBS, and I think that it's a conversation we need to raise to the national limelight, so that we can, if something untoward is happening there, it can be addressed. If you don't have reliable data from government and government agencies, we are going to have confusion. It would be terrible to see us go back to the very terrible bad days of Federal Office of Statistics 25 years ago, when the CBN had its own numbers, the Federal Office of Statistics had its own numbers, independent economic reviewers and analysts had their own numbers, and those three sets of numbers differed significantly. The NBS in the last 10 years or there about 10, 15 years have provided a lot of credibility and stability with numbers that has helped planning, especially in the private sector. Now we're beginning to see a departure from that, and it's very worrisome.
Okay, well, we do hope that they will be transparent in whatever they're doing, and we'll get to that point where everything that needs to be done consistently, as you have said. Whether it is auditing of parastatals or anything should be done openly or consistently as well. And whether it is borrowing of money that they're talking about, still borrowing now, we should be transparent about it and know what we're using it for. Whether they're using data from rebasing or not rebasing, let the data be trustworthy enough for us to know that our economy is going a particular direction. But this is, like you said, this is an open conversation that needs to continue, and we hope to continue this conversation with you on a later date. But at this point, this is where we have to draw the curtain. Thank you so much, Mr. Sopitan, for coming on the show this morning.
It was a pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. We've been talking with Mr. Segun Sopitan, Principal Partner, Woodridge And Scott Consulting, and this is where we draw the curtain on the show this morning. Thank you for your time. My name is Nyamgul Agaji. Bye for now.